Well, Wen, thank you very much for that introduction. My name is Joe Tomkowitz, and I'll moderate this panel. I'm a partner at Thailand's oldest law firm of Telecky and Gibbons, and I'm the co-chair of our energy industry team. At 130 years old, Telecky and Gibbons is the premier law firm for doing business in Southeast Asia. Our thanks and gratitude to our previous speakers and panelists today, including our host excellencies from Brunei and their distinguished team, along with Dr. Nuki from the ASEAN Center for Energy and DMG Events. We're now in day 2 of the ASEAN Energy Business Forum with the theme of Energy Sustainability Vision. Our previous speakers set the stage for 3 days of events. And with this next panel, we hope to advance the day 2 themes by diving deeper into new partnerships, new technologies, and the innovations involved in the ASEAN energy transfer. So I am pleased to moderate this panel of 5 distinguished speakers. Abdul Salam bin Haji Abdul Wahab is the head of Sustainable Energy Division for the Ministry of Energy Brunei. Melanie Slade is the Senior Program Manager, Energy Efficiency and Emerging Economies at the International Energy Agency, IEA, in Paris. Dr. Yoshitaka Ushio is a Senior Advisor in the International Cooperation Division, Energy Conservation Center, Japan, ECCJ. Dr. Peter Graham is the CEO and Executive Director of GBPN, which we know as the Global Buildings Performance Network. He's in Melbourne. And Brian Byrne is the Senior Vice President at Siemens Energy Asia Pacific, and he is located in Singapore. So please, let me begin today with our first speaker. Salam, I'm sorry. As we mentioned, you're the head of the Sustainable Energy Division at the Ministry of Energy in Brunei. You have a solid history of advocating the balance between traditional and renewable energies. We're aware from our earlier presentations that ASEAN set a 23% renewable energy target by 2025. And maybe we can take that next step in this panel today and talk about the target. So maybe you could provide us some background on the energy efficiency programs and mandates across the region. And I know we have a slide deck that you're going to bring up at some point. So we'll try and get that up after you've taken a shot at that question. But is that okay with you?
Yeah, that's okay, Joe. Yeah.
Great,
okay.
Thanks.
All right. Yeah. All right. So on your question, with regards to the what we are currently doing in Brunei, so we are actually aligning all the target of ASEAN, which is the 32% of energy intensity reduction, which have been set under PIKE Phase 2 under ASEAN Center for Energy and ASEAN member states. So for us in Brunei, we have actually done quite a lot of things to achieve the targets, and we are working together with ASEAN Center for Energy, Dr. Naoki team, and we actually doing things together with them. And then at the same time, we are also getting assistance and help from experts from other ASEAN member states for us to move forward in terms of, making things much faster in terms of regulatory frameworks and all the best practice that have been successfully undertaken in other ASEAN member states. So that's what we are currently doing, Joe. Yeah.
Right. Well, that's good. I mean, I know it's a big transition from year to year as the ASEAN chair switches from country to country, but that's a very aggressive posture, and I'm sure you've been engaging a lot more online with the COVID restrictions in place. So
yeah, exactly.
Well done so far.
All right, should be okay. Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Joseph, as the moderator, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen. Very good morning, good afternoon from other countries, and it is indeed a great honor actually for me to be one of the panelists in the ASEAN Energy Forum, Business Forum this year, together with all leading panelists from different parts of the world who have been in the business for more than 2 decades. However, it is rather unfortunate, that this time around, due to the outbreak of pandemic COVID-19, we are not able to have a physical meeting and be able to meet in person. Let us together pray and hope that this pandemic will be gone soon and we'll be able to see each other physically in the near future. All right, so next slide, it's on the ASEAN Plan of Action for Energy Cooperation, PIKE 2016 and 2025. So let me bring all of you to subdue this PIKE, which is actually a series of valuable a policy document that aims to promote multilateral energy cooperation and integration to attain the goals of ASEAN Economic Community. It serves as the platform of the APEC process for deeper engagement towards enhancing energy security, accessibility, affordability, and sustainability within the framework of the ASEAN Economic Community. The APEC Phase 2 2021 to 2025, which was actually endorsed during the 30th AMEM in 2020 in Vietnam, is the continuation of APEC Phase 1 2016-2020, which sets a more ambitious targets to enhance energy security and sustainability in various fronts. It espouses commitments of the Paris Agreement on climate change and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals by taking effective and concrete action for intensified promotion of energy policies and programs for greater adoption and implementation of action on energy efficiency and conservation measures, and development and deployment of renewable energy as clean energy option towards sustainable energy future. Next slide, please. So the APEC Phase 2 will continue to focus on 7 program areas, which is under energy efficiency and conservation, with a key strategy to reduce energy intensity down to 32% by 2025 based on 2005 level, and encourage further EEC efforts, especially in industry and transportation sector. In order to achieve the aspirational target, 5 outcome-based strategies with 14 action plans have been laid down. The reduction of energy intensity will be achieved through strategic regional action with focus on OBS3, strengthening energy efficiency in building, OBS4, pursuing energy efficiency in transport, and OBS5, advancing energy efficiency in industry. In addition, enhancing participation of private sector and financial institutions under OBS2, as well as expanding, harmonizing, and promoting energy efficiency and standard and labeling under OBS1 are also equally important to be executed in order to bring positive impact for developing a sustainable energy future. All 14 action plans under each respective OBS serve to accelerate the implementation and execution of all strategies under Program Area 4 on EEC, with an absolute goals in reducing energy intensity down to 32% by 2025. Next slide, please. As a significant achievement, ASEAN has attained a 21% energy intensity level in 2018, surpassing the aspirational target of 20% set for 2020. This clearly showed a shift by ASEAN towards low carbon economy. The ASEAN member state will accelerate energy transition efforts by setting a more aggressive energy intensity reduction target of 32% by 2025 based on 2005 level to achieve high impact energy efficiency improvement and energy saving towards the reduction of energy intensity. The ASEAN will examine the benefit of new technologies, market mechanism, and policy support with focus in building, transport, and industrial sectors to serve as basis in forging cooperation amongst energy efficient stakeholders. Next slide, please. So the sectoral energy demand in ASEAN has been seen via a baseline scenario, which the total final energy consumption in ASEAN is projected to increase by 146% by 2040, rising to 922 metric ton of oil equivalents from 337 MTOE in 2017. Industry and transport, both the energy intensive sectors, account for vast majority of defect shed until 2040, with share of 41.2% and 37.1% respectively. This projection has been served as the main driver towards the development of outcome-based strategy 4 and 5 and the EEC program area under APEC Phase 2. Pursuing energy efficiency in transport and advancing energy efficiency in industry have been measured as an important element towards the reduction of defect shared from the two sectors. Next slide, please. So let me now bring you all to see how Brunei Darussalam is aligning all EEC policies and initiatives in supporting the APIC Phase 2 within ASEAN. So in support of APIC Phase 2, Brunei Darussalam is focusing on the reduction of energy intensity. Last year, Brunei Darussalam energy intensity was at 240 tons of oil equivalents per million US dollar of GDP under the short-term EEC roadmap 2020 to 2025 for the next 5 years. Brunei Darussalam strategically plans to reduce the energy intensity down to 210 tons of oil equivalents per million USD of GDP, a reduction of about 25.4% using 2005 baseline. This aspirational target contributes towards a carbon emission reduction from 28 million tons of CO2 under BAU scenario down to 22 million tons of CO2 under enhanced emission scenario by 2025, which contribute to 20% reduction of CO2 projection in the energy sector. So this reduction is equivalent to a significant CO2 absorption of 112 million trees. Next slide, please. Let us now move on to see on our short-term EEC roadmap, which runs from 2020 to 2025. In order to meet and deliver the set aspirational target, as I mentioned earlier, Brunei Darussalam will carry out a number of EEC policy framework and initiative for the next 5 years, which include the Standard and Labeling Order and its subsidiary legislation from 2021 onwards, development of energy management policy starting Q4 this year, development of commercial tariff reform and fuel economy regulation in 2022 plus next year. And also equally important is our continuous awareness raising program for the next 5 years. One of our core activity under energy management policy is the energy auditing program, which is carried out by ASEAN certified energy manager and auditor from Ministry of Energy. The energy auditing program is aimed for us to formulate the energy efficiency index, which will be used as the baseline data to accurately measure the building energy performance. Having done all these EEC initiatives coupled with all the policy frameworks that I mentioned earlier, Brunei Darussalam would be able to reduce the energy intensity to 25.4% by 2025. Next slide, please. Certainly, we are not able to achieve our aspirational target in reducing energy intensity without cross-ministerial collaboration. On green building initiative, Ministry of Energy shall collaborate with the Ministry of Development via the Authority for Building Control and Construction Industry, ABCI, and the Department of Mechanical and Electrical, DME, in the development of EC building guidelines and the establishment of green building certification under Brunei Accredited Green Unified Seal tool. For energy efficiency and consumption building guidelines, it is mandatory to all government buildings since it was launched in May 2015. And the Ministry of Energy and Ministry of Development are currently in the process of aligning this guideline to be incorporated into green building certification under Bagus. Meanwhile, for the Ministry of Development is currently in the process of developing Bagus certification of green building initiative. Building energy efficiency index and from the EEC building guideline will only serve as the minimum requirement for both government and commercial building in Brunei Darussalam on the latest stage. Next slide, please. Meanwhile, on the Green Transportation Initiative, we have been in collaboration with the Ministry of Transport and Info Communication on the deployment of electric vehicles and the formulation of fuel economy regulation. The deployment of electric vehicle falls under Strategy 3 of the Brunei Darussalam National Climate Change Policy, BNCCP, which was officially launched in July 25, 2020, last year, with a target to increase total share of electric vehicle to 60% of total annual vehicle sales by 2035. To kick off the project, we have just launched the electric vehicle pilot project on March 25, 2021, aims to study and identify the public perception and response towards EV utilization in the country. We are also formulating the fuel economy regulation in support of Brunei Vision 2035 on energy security, as well as economic, social, and environmental sustainability. This regulation has proven to be among the most effective tools in countering oil demand and greenhouse gas emission, and therefore it is playing an important role in the reduction of energy intensity to 45% by 2035 under transportation sector in Brunei Darussalam. So this is going to be my last slide. So someone might ask, how do we organize to deliver towards the implementation of policy measures in the EEC roadmap that we have set? So this is where we essentially require a proper coordination between the government agencies on the basis of whole of government approach. There is a large spectrum of joint agency initiative from communication to collaboration. So this view graph shows the organizational layout towards the development and implementation of EEC policy measures.
Salam, we might need the next slide here.
Yeah. I think this one is my final slide, Joe.
Yeah. That's great. I didn't mean to interrupt. It just hadn't changed over. So yeah, I think we see the structure now. So that's understandable.
Yeah. All right. So
okay,
that's from me. Joe, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, some great statistics. I look at the reduction of energy intensity by 20% in 6 years. I mean, these are things that we'll move over and talk to Melody about, but a really impressive deck. Took a look at Brunei and we took at the larger ASEAN picture. But Melanie Slade, you've worked with governments around the world to design and implement these energy efficiency policies for more than 30 years. You're now at the IEA, and 2021 to me has been the year of IEA. Some of the reports have been exceptional, and I've really enjoyed reading them, especially work from home. So let's advance the topic. We've talked about the programs and mandates in ASEAN. Could you start with a brief overview of where maybe these emissions come from? Because I think that guides your thinking. And then after that, could you bring into greater focus and discuss the roles of standards, certification, and steering energy efficiency? Because I know that's something that you really do advise very thoroughly on. So thank you for that. And remember to take your mic off of mute.
Thanks very much, Joseph. Thanks for the introduction, and thanks for the opportunity to be here. It's a great privilege to be here again. So as Joseph said, I'm going to start in very true IEA fashion. I'm going to start with the big picture. So where are we? Where do we need to be? So we'll all, we've all heard an awful lot of discussion about net zero this year. 2021 is the year of net zero. But we, of course, have a long way to go to reduce the rising trend in emissions. So by December 2020, we'd already seen global emissions increase beyond the level they'd been in 2019. So all of that period during the health crisis, where there was a reduction in emissions because there was a reduction in activity, that's history now, ancient history, and we're seeing a rise in emissions again. So we've got an awful lot to do if we're going to see that sort of secure, sustainable, affordable, clean energy transition happen for everybody. And in terms of the solution, the two biggest areas we need to act are, of course, energy efficiency and renewables. They make up about 80% of the solution together. And the thing about energy efficiency is the immediacy. If we don't exploit cost-effective energy efficiency to the full over the next 10 years, the clean energy transition will be out of reach. It will be too expensive. It will be too slow. So we really need to pull out all of the stops on energy efficiency now. We don't need to wait for new technologies. We know what to do. We know which policies work. We know the technologies we need in this period, in this 10-year period. They're already there. And they're as efficient as we need them to be. So it's how do we really quickly scale these up? That's the important thing. Just to say, unfortunately, we're not going in the right direction in terms of energy intensity improvement either at the moment, despite the great work of regions like ASEAN and countries like Brunei. Most of us will remember that back in 2015, when the Sustainable Development Goals were established, there was a call for an improvement of a doubling of energy efficiency improvement thereabouts. So it was a kind of a 2% a year that was being looked for. By last year, we were saying, well, actually, we didn't do so well, so it needed to be 3. And unfortunately, this year we're saying, well, we didn't do so well again. In fact, it got worse. So we're now looking at 4. We're looking for something like a 4% improvement being necessary. So like I say, using known technologies, using known policies, how do we do this? And so history tells us that we need policy, we need standards. They are the most effective things. There are all sorts of other things you can do to improve energy efficiency as well, but if we need to act fast, that's where we need to focus. We don't see the market making the growth, the changes at pace that's necessary. And the other thing to say about policy, which is a bit tricky, and I'm sure Salam this will resonate with him, particularly in times of crisis, it's quite difficult for energy efficiency to get the attention it deserves. Even officials who are involved in policy development in energy efficiency struggle to bring it to the fore because big decisions are being made with government about government funding. There are massive global issues, social issues to be resolved, and getting energy efficiency in there is quite tricky at times, particularly at crunch times. But what we're trying to do is develop evidence to try and reverse that, to show how energy efficiency fits with those other needs, those societal needs, those economic needs as well. And we're often asked, how to persuade finance ministers and presidents how to get energy efficiency going. Not the energy efficiency crowd, because we know it, but how do we get outside that box? And it's interesting. Motivation varies very much from country to country. But we have 2 really fantastic sort of success stories, I think, that we can learn a bit from, and ASEAN can learn from too. So, in recent years, in terms of energy efficiency, China's made great strides. When we were seeing those high levels of improvement, half of the improvement globally was coming because of action China was taking. But that wasn't motivated by energy efficiency. It was motivated predominantly by local air pollution and the need to control that, and also needing to reduce oil imports. So if we look at those levers and make sure that we provide evidence to show how energy efficiency supports those other bigger picture things, that's how we start to try and influence the finance ministers. It's another great example from India. And people have been watching in recent times, the last few years, what a massive impact solar and energy efficiency combined have made on India's energy demand. And again, that's because of the desire for autonomy. It's all about energy security, not about energy efficiency. So of course, now we're moving into a period, or we've moved into a period where the priorities everywhere are economic growth and jobs. And the good news for energy efficiency here is that analysis shows that particularly in buildings, the most cost-effective way of investing your development money, your recovery money, is in energy efficiency. So if you look at buildings in particular, which is one of the most fruitful areas here, you can create something like 15 jobs per $1 million invested. And that's the best place you can put your money at the moment. And the really important thing, and I know I can see Peter nodding, but I know he'll agree here, this isn't a flash in the pan. This is good quality, local, long-term jobs. So that's the really important thing. So the point I'm trying to make here, the world's been through this terrible crisis, but hopefully we can make something good. We can have a phoenix here. We can make something good come out of this crisis, and that can be energy efficiency. So just to, in terms of where energy savings are, and particularly those driven by standards, and this is, as I said earlier, the place we know how to act, what to do. We need to get on with it. If we can provide the evidence for governments, as I've just described, to show how important this is to their economies and to social development. So Salam basically gave my list for what Brunei are doing, for what I would recommend anybody does. So just to go through them again, in industry, we'd be talking about energy management standards. We'd be talking about standards for key energy using products, particularly electric motor systems. We need mandatory targets with effective penalties and rewards, so that under and overachievers are rewarded or in effect penalised. That's the most effective thing, policy package you could put together for industry, and it's based largely on standards. In transport, we need fuel economy standards for passenger vehicles, for heavy duty vehicles, and along with efficiency and I would say interoperability standards for electric vehicles. And of course, in this region, I think particular attention we need to pay for 2 and 3 wheelers in that case as well. Heavy duty vehicles is one thing to mention because it's something that's not done very often in very many countries. So that's something that we need to see pursued more actively, I think. I'm going to skip buildings because Peter's going to do that, but we're basically talking about mandatory building codes and mandatory building disclosure. Australia does this particularly well. But last couple of things I want to focus on appliances. So the things that go in the buildings, that use the energy in the buildings. We have huge opportunity here to scale up, and using standards as the backbone for that scaling up. And a brilliant example from this region is in air conditioning. So if you think about air conditioning, particularly room air conditioning in Asia, you usually think about famous Japanese brands, famous Korean brands. But it might surprise people to know that Thailand's become the second largest exporter of air conditioning equipment, second only to China. And that's been done quite deliberately through standards. So they've actually used this process quite deliberately to do that. And I just want to end by mentioning an initiative that we're working on with the UK government in part of their COP presidency for COP26 later this year. It's a call to action on product efficiency, where we're trying to get governments, manufacturers, civil society together to work towards the doubling of the efficiency of a group of 4 key products over the next 10 years to show that we can really make this change. And so just let me know if you'd like to go no more. And sorry, Joseph, for going slightly over time.
Oh, no, that's fine, Melanie. I mean, there's a lot to unbundle in there, and we're used to IEA giving us the information. So thank you for that. I mean, it's interesting that you point out the 2 success stories, the China strategy on air pollution and reduction of oil imports. Yeah, we need to remember that. There have been great strides in Asia and ASEAN, and so we got to continue to remember that. But I think this ties in nicely to our third panelist, Ushio. I've noted here that you and I both went to school in the Midwest of the United States, but you have a master's in civil engineering, and you moved into through the organization at Nippon Steel. But now you're the senior energy advisor at the ECCI. So with your background in both industry and policy, you have a unique position. And today, I was hoping you could help us understand a little bit of how to promote energy efficiency in building sector in particular. We've noted that the building sector takes a 30% share, and I'm learning that as panels like yours let me know these numbers, takes a 30% share of the world's energy consumption. And this appears to be increasing if we look at the IEA reports that Melody and her boss have put out. So how do we deal with this, Ushio? And if you need a slide deck to show us through, we'll give Yuyan a note that he's going to pull up that slide deck shortly. But please, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm very happy to have an opportunity to join this panel discussion. From the almost 50 years experience of Japan energy efficiency conservation promotion, we have understood the 3 key policies had contributed to Japanese E&C promotion, particularly for industry sectors. These include carrot and stick policies, Number one is Energy Conservation Act. This is a standard regulation. This is a stick policy. And the second is the financial support system and incentive. This is a carrot policy. And third is also difficult. And the most important point is private sector's voluntary effort and collaboration with the government. That is very important. These three policies are, of course, important to the building sector, and particularly development of the comprehensive and effective. Comprehensive means standard is very, very easy to understand everybody, and effective it must be everybody to stick to do it. This kind of standard is very important. So, this is I think building code and also green building code. Now ASEAN countries are developing. So since 2000, Japanese government emphasized building sector for the E&C policy and have developed regulatory framework in building sector and enacted Building Energy Conservation Act in 2015. And seems to be well implemented now. So implementation is also very important. So very needed for some kind of system. So, but now Japan government tackle another new challenges for carbon neutrality in building sector. One of key policy for this is promotion and dissemination of zero energy buildings. I would like to present this issue now as another answer to the moderator. So please show my presentation. My short presentation is listed methodology for titled Methodology for Achieving Non-Residential Zero Energy Building. Next, please. This is a background of zero energy building dissemination in Japan. Looking at the real situation in the commercial building sector, the current E&C measures and regulatory framework cannot achieve COP21 target in Japan. Therefore, this challengeable target realizes zero energy building in average for newly constructed public and private building by 2030 has been set in order to promote, disseminate high-level energy efficiency building, ZEB ready fast, and realize net ZEB by step-by-step approach through the continuous effort. Next, please. This presents ZEB family concept, which is a process to achieve net zero, step-by-step approach. The concept of ZEB has been expanded to ZEB series according to actual condition. First step is to aim for super energy efficient buildings, which are defined as ZEB ready, and then aim for nearly ZEB, net ZEB by applying further energy efficiency measures and the introduction of renewable energy. Next, please. This presents definition and evaluation method of zero energy building. Horizontal axis is the volume of the energy consumption, and vertical axis is the volume of renewable energy supply. The baseline is a benchmark, a design standard value of the primary energy consumption of the buildings. First, 50% energy efficiency improvement from the baseline, then building becomes ZEB ready. And then by further E energy efficiency measures and introduction of RE, the building will become nearly ZEB and net ZEB. Now, many buildings are registered as a ZEB family buildings in Japan. The graph at the right-hand side shows some of them. The government promotes ZEB family buildings and also applied this concept to ISO technical specification. Next, please. For standardization of this step-by-step approach towards ZEB, this concept will be published as the technical specification TS 23764, which has been approved by the DTS Barrett in ISO TC 205. The purpose of the standardization is to improve practicability to realize ZEB by promoting the ZEB family concept. Next, please. There are 6 core elements in TS 23764. I will not explain the detail, but I would like to say that document describe basic concept from the planning stage to the operation stage of the building. Once published, you can look at it and utilize the concept for your policy making on the building energy efficiency. Next, please. Japanese government has taken the various measures to disseminate ZEB using this concept. This figure shows the progress image of ZEB. Leading owner registration and leading planner designer registration system are effectively applied for the dissemination and promotion of the zero energy buildings. Next, please. These are ZEB brochures for the building owners and the ZEB guidelines for designers. Next, please. To ASEAN, the ASEAN Japan Energy Efficiency Partnership Program, called AG Program, and the JESWORLD Program implemented several activities to promote ZEB family concept. We will continue these activities in ASEAN. Next, please. In addition, for the dissemination of ZEB family concept in ASEAN, the ZEB-ready subcategory in energy efficiency building category of ASEAN Energy Award was introduced in 2019. After this panel discussion, there may be some the result of this year will be announced. And last year, to 2020, 2 buildings, Malaysia and Singapore, nearly ZEB building and net ZEB building, shown in this slide, were awarded for the first time. The ZEB family evaluation results are shown in the graph based on the evaluation criteria of ASEAN Energy Award. This year, we hope that some building will be awarded in ZEB category of ASEAN Energy Award. Next, please. This is the final summary of my presentation. Oh, thank you very much for your attention.
Ushio, that was very interesting. I'm looking forward to seeing the ZEB family list as it comes out and as you make set these goals. It's a really methodical, organized approach. Then it's one that I'm sure a lot of countries can model after. So thank you for that. I think Dr. Peter Graham, I think this ties into some of the work you're currently doing, but in another part of the country. So Dr. Peter Graham, CEO and Executive Director of GBPN, and I told you before, that's the Global Buildings Performance Network. You have over 20 years experience in this area, and you've been a technical advisor to the United Nations Environment Program on Sustainable Buildings. I'd like to see if we couldn't advance the discussion here a little bit with sustainable building design and then build and maintenance that achieve overall carbon reductions, I think is a theme that is core to this week's ASEAN Energy Business Forum. So Dr. Peter, if you could take it over from here, I'd greatly appreciate it.
Thanks, Joe. Yes, it is a great question. How to scale up sustainable building design. I'd like to thank the other panelists as well for the really interesting insights so far. And it's a great privilege to be here. I really like the question as posed: how can we achieve a scaling up of sustainable buildings? And knowing how to is really at the heart of GBPN's approach to supporting the public and private sectors to develop and reform policies that improve energy efficiency and achieve zero emissions in the building sector. So to mainstream sustainable buildings, we've heard we need to drive up demand, we need to bridge an investment gap, we need to build local industry and administrative capability, As Dr. Ushio just described, we have a formula for achieving zero emissions buildings, reducing embodied emissions and maximising energy efficiency through building design, fuel switching to clean electricity, integrated renewables on site, and connecting to renewable energy grids. And we also know, we've heard from Melanie too, that there are some key regulatory measures like building energy codes and energy performance certification that provide a foundation for achieving mitigation and adaptation goals in several sectors, including finance, energy, industry, economic development, and the environment. And we know that their coverage and stringency and compliance with building regulations across ASEAN can be improved, particularly in the residential sector. So I guess in short, we know what to do, but it is the how to make these changes and mainstream these changes that needs attention. As Melanie knows, how do we quickly scale up? There are a range of frameworks and roadmaps of actions that are being developed at the moment in the world. But to implement these actions, we need to plan reforms to the status quo. Supporting actions with reforms shifts the emphasis to enabling initiatives like education, financing, and stakeholder engagement. So I'd like to offer two key how-tos that can achieve these aims and contribute to achieving zero emissions across ASEAN economies. The first is top-down, the second is bottom-up. Both ultimately need to align in order for sustainable buildings to become the norm. So the first one, the top-down one, is about setting zero emissions goals and actions for the building sector. So reducing life cycle energy demand and improving energy efficiency in buildings in the ASEAN region is essential if we're going to keep global warming below 1.5 degrees. Modelling commissioned by GBPN last year showed that in aggregate, ASEAN countries offer the 4th largest building sector emission savings potential globally by 2050, with Indonesia alone ranked 5th. There are therefore massive opportunities for achieving energy and emission savings in the region if they can be aggregated. Making a commitment to achieving zero emissions in the building sector is really the first fundamental step in driving demand for sustainable buildings, because it demonstrates governments and companies are no longer asking why should we change, but rather how can we achieve our goal. GBPN has since 2015 been supporting governments in Southeast Asia to identify and prioritise building sector policy actions and policy reform pathways that contribute to zero emissions goals. Over the years, we've refined our approach down to 4 key stages: mapping the energy and emissions baselines of the building stock to show the distance to target and identifying where the big savings opportunities are, supporting stakeholders to prioritise the most effective policy actions, and then guiding the development of implementation plans. We've applied this approach to contribute to NAMA development in Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, Philippines, as well as recently NDC roadmaps for low carbon buildings in Vietnam and Cambodia. What we've learned through these projects is that achieving an implementable set of policy actions requires political commitment, a legal mandate, improved access to performance data, and a common MRV methodology for developing building stock energy and emission baselines and performance standards. This is necessary to provide regional consistency and support enablers such as financing and investment. Further work under the ASEAN Plan of Action for Energy Cooperation to develop common regional policy frameworks and performance standards for buildings should be amplified, focusing on building types that contribute most to driving energy demand, such as vertical housing, could increase investment by aggregating emissions and energy saving opportunities and establishing clear performance metrics for fiscal policies and climate finance. Studies indicate that common regional standards could also boost economic recovery. Energy savings and co-benefits delivered by the EU Energy Performance in Buildings Directive and Energy Efficiency Directives, for example, have potentially added between 1 and 2.7% to EU's GDP. And as Melanie was mentioning, it's created between 10 and 19 jobs per 1 million euros invested in building energy efficiency renovations. But most important is the need to engage stakeholders at all stages so that the zero emission goals and actions are owned by the organisations and institutions that need to implement them. Mainstreaming sustainable buildings is also a unique challenge, and every policy action that's taken provides new knowledge in how to change the status quo and innovate. This knowledge is generated in local markets and needs to be captured and shared. That's why top-down frameworks need to align with bottom-up action, particularly in such a diverse sector as buildings, which leads me to the bottom-up how-to. The how-to is build local coalitions for policy reform. The GBPN is a global community of trusted local experts and influencers in building sector energy and climate policy. And our how-to starts with connecting local policymakers, building professionals and local experts by forming coalitions that work together to create enabling policy settings for increasing sustainable building development. We involve stakeholders in determining the technical assistance required for policy planning, adoption or implementation, and what the learning and capacity building needs are. Empowering local experts has proven to be very resilient during these restricted COVID times as well, and establishes local capacity to support governments for long-term policy initiatives, monitoring and evaluation. ACE and ASEAN, along with many national organisations, green building councils, NGOs and international agencies have been actively promoting and supporting building energy efficiency programs for many years. Progress is certainly being made and there's no shortage of local expertise, but we are still not on a path to decarbonising the building sector. A key barrier is the fragmentation of decarbonisation efforts and providing sustained long-term local support for regulatory reform. We need to recognise that implementing policies that mandate sustainable buildings will disrupt the status quo, and that implementation of the necessary policy reforms requires a change management and people-centred approach. To this end, GBPN are implementing multi-stakeholder coalitions in India and Indonesia. Our Indonesian coalition is called HIDUP, which means alive in Bahasa Indonesia. It brings together local policymakers, influencers and implementers to develop and pilot a policy reform plan to achieve zero emissions housing. The HIDUP plan aligns local, regional and national policy actions and is now being piloted to develop zero emissions building standards and building stock data in the city of Samarinda and in support of Bali's clean energy transitions policy. These bottom-up activities are also informing GBPN's role in national initiatives, including the drafting of model codes for green and smart government housing for Indonesia's new capital city, and supporting the Ministry of Finance on fiscal policy reforms for encouraging investments in sustainable buildings. Lessons learned and policy insights will be shared with principal ministries through a new policy hub we're establishing with the Institute for Essential Services Reform in Jakarta. So how to achieve mainstream sustainable zero emissions buildings? Well, support actions with plans for reform and implement enabling finance, capacity building and stakeholder engagement through these two aligned approaches. From the top down, establishing emissions goals and policy reform pathways, and from the bottom up, forming local coalitions and providing sustained support for policy reform and implementation by local experts, empowered for the long haul of policy planning, adoption, implementation and learning. And above all else, we need to stay focused on achieving the zero emissions goals for 2050. Thanks, Joe.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, you raised something about the improved access to data that I hadn't thought about. I mean, as we've gone from Salam through Melanie to you to Dr. Ushio, you know, it's clear that data and driving data toward you for analysis is hugely important for accuracy, but also just consistency in learning, right? I mean, it's part of the the ZEB family and data driving. So, you know, I'm sure there'll be McKinsey sessions on that we can all study on how you drive data to the right people. But speaking of the right people, our next speaker is Brian Byrne. He's the Senior Vice President of Siemens, the Asia Pacific Hub, and he's the Managing Director of Siemens Energy in Singapore. I didn't know this, but Siemens is carved out from the Siemens AG, and we understand that Siemens Energy is fast approaching its first anniversary. So happy anniversary to you on the September 28th of being listed on the Frankfurt Stock Exchange. So that's a big deal. So why don't we do this, Brian? Could you tell me, does that carve out sort of during this time period and the energy transition, especially here in ASEAN, does that give you a look into the role of that innovative energy technologies in realizing the energy efficiency programs? You know, does that give you a better view on this, or maybe tell us a little bit about that, and also about some of the technologies that you have, if there's time for that?
Absolutely, Joe, and thank you very much for having me, and thank you to my guests as well. It's been pretty educational over the past 45 minutes or so, learning all about the different areas. So as you said, we're kind of the new kids on the block, really. So we've been in existence for about a year. I hope there's birthday cake. I'm not sure there's birthday cake, but we'll try and arrange the birthday cake maybe. Here in Asia Pacific, we have about 2,500 people. We operate across 10 countries. And the whole purpose of our existence as Siemens Energy is to focus on the very areas that you just referred to, Joe. And we like to think, or we pride ourselves on being one of the very few companies globally that operate across the entire energy landscape. So all the way from generation to transmission and covering both conventional and renewable energy generation sources as well. So it does give us a particular perspective, and it also gives us, I think, a sense of urgency in terms of some of the things that need to happen in the not too distant future to meet some of the goals that Melanie and others have been talking about. And maybe it's worthwhile just by summarizing a little bit some of the key messages I think that I've picked up here. And I was really fascinated and interested to hear from Salam about what Brunei are doing. And Ushio mentioned a similar program in Japan, as did Melanie, in terms of some of the standards that we wanted to see implemented across the industry. And Peter as well, I'll pick up on what Peter said when he talked about the need for top-down intervention, if you like, so we can meet these aggressive efficiency targets as well as carbon emission reductions. And it's also worth noting, why this is particularly important to have these government-driven or top-down initiatives, because it matters a great deal to all of the companies that are operating in this sector. And this kind of intervention and this kind of policy that Salam, for example, talked about really does make a tremendous difference in driving the direction of companies and industries as a whole as well. It sets a precedent for the kind of programs that need to be put in place. It galvanizes efforts across industries and through shareholders as well, in turn driving those companies in terms of meeting or establishing and meeting specific targets. And it's very, very important. And I live in Singapore, so I experience this on almost a daily basis. It's critical in steering the direction of policy to create sustainable cities and economies. And I think Melanie also mentioned as well the need to have particular standards in place to drive all of this. And that is a critical factor that we need to consider, because with the right standards and the right government support, we'll achieve economies of scale in my industry, which relates primarily to power generation, but across many other industries as well. And that direction creates the standards that allows most companies to adopt the technologies, which will hopefully, lead to an overall cost reduction and thereby make all of our lives a little simpler, I guess, in the long run. I did mention, so my focus is on power generation. And power generation, maybe to put this in context, it generates around about 35% of global carbon emissions, which is a significant contributor. There's no question about it. But just looking at power generation in a silo, clearly is not going to be sufficient, which is why it's really important to hear about some of the other initiatives that are taking place. And we're talking quite a bit about building technology and sustainable cities in general today as well. So it will take a combined effort working across several industries to truly make a difference in terms of meeting some of these aggressive reduction targets, as well as accelerate this energy transition that we've been talking about. And this energy transition, Melanie talked, for example, the incredible strides that have been made in places like India and China. And it's absolutely true, and it's a wonderful thing to see. But it's also important to recognize that in those countries, as well as some others, the use of coal as a generation medium is still prevalent, right? It's still significant. And this is the kind of area for Siemens Energy that we're trying to address by providing alternatives, by creating affordable roadmaps for this energy transition, so that we can help our customers decarbonize and hopefully then in turn, benefit society as a whole as well. And as a company, we have our own carbon neutral target. So it's our own intent then to be carbon neutral by 2030. And that requires significant, of course, coordination across many of the businesses and many of the countries that we operate in. So if we talk maybe some of the specifics, and I'll get very quickly to some of the examples you're looking for, Joe, as well. But there was one thing I just wanted to mention as well, just to touch upon, I talked about coal earlier, how it contributes about 10 metric gigatons of carbon dioxide annually, an incredible amount and a significant proportion that's coming from this particular region. Now, as a company, Siemens Energy late last year said we would no longer be involved in the construction of new coal power plants, and we've lived up to that commitment over the past year. We have said, however, that we will support our customers improve their energy efficiency, including coal plants, in an effort then to try and reduce the overall carbon footprint through that efficiency improvement measure as well. Our main focus today, in addition to some of the newer technologies you mentioned about, like hydrogen, battery storage, and renewables through our sister company, Siemens Gamesa, is also looking at our existing gas-fired power plants as well, and seeing what we can do to improve the efficiency of those particular projects. And it is true, I think, and it's important to state that gas-fired power plants will be a bridging technology. They will be used to provide a cleaner, greener footprint, but undoubtedly, I think, and to build on what Melanie has said, the future is undoubtedly renewable, both in solar and wind and several other forms as well. So this is the roadmap that we see and the plan that we're working towards here in Siemens Energy to help facilitate that overall transmission. So I do have a couple of examples I'd like to share maybe, and hopefully they're broad enough, I guess, to give not only a sense of the scale that we in Siemens Energy operate in, but also give some closer to home examples, I think, in terms of how energy efficiency is important to this region. I'd start maybe here in Singapore, one of our key customers, Pacific Light and Power. We worked with them very recently to implement a key upgrade at one of their power plants, which involved the installation of some state-of-the-art technology in their gas turbine, the work on several of the supporting systems around that gas turbine. And what it will do is reduce the overall carbon dioxide output by about 18,000 tons of CO2 every year. And if you look at that overall plant in terms of some of the other measures that that particular customer has implemented, we're looking at a reduction in carbon emissions by over 40,000 tons per annum, which is pretty significant. And maybe to put context, it relates to carbon-free electricity supply for about 20,000 households in total. So that is a pretty significant project, we think. One of the other areas we're also involved in is the transmission of electricity too. And I think this is an area that sometimes gets overlooked. But for example, we have a very interesting project in Vietnam at the Ninh Thuan province, where we worked with the local transmission provider there to upgrade and install a power substation for a 450 megawatt solar plant as well. And it's important to remember, I think, that the quantity and quality of renewable power generated, regardless of where that is in the world, is entirely dependent on having a sustainable, reliable power grid infrastructure to transport that power, of course, to both domestic and industrial users. And it's an area, I think, that requires equal focus as the source of generation does as well. And when we look at our transmission technologies, we believe we can improve energy losses or reduce energy losses by about 50%, for example, in high voltage DC applications. And that's an incredible number if you consider where we stand today. So having that degree of efficiency improvement, reduces the installed capacity. It reduces the costs needed to install, operate, and maintain that plant as a whole. And it makes, hopefully, again, everything a little more sustainable overall as well. And also on the topic of transmission, we're working on new technologies. Joe, you asked for a specific example where we're looking to create SF6-free products. SF6 is sulfur hexafluoride. And yes, I did have to read that one as well. It wasn't on the tip of my tongue, to be quite honest. But it's actually a much more prevalent and much more significant greenhouse gas. And its potential over carbon dioxide, for example, equates to 23,500 times the impact of carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas. So eliminating this gas from our technology, and it is used in some applications today, is critically important. Now, we have recently signed a memorandum of understanding with Mitsubishi Electric not too long ago, and it was on World Environment Day, in fact, where we both committed to the development of the technology that would use and implement SF6-free technology in transmission as well. So that was a very important step for us overall. So maybe I'll just end by saying, you know, I'm really happy to hear the key messages here. It is really fascinating to see the overlap between government, institutions and private industry coming together to create some of the infrastructure that's needed to do this. And I would just end by maybe how I started, you know, that government support, that infrastructure is needed to really make a sustainable difference in energy generation, transmission and efficiency overall. And again, I will just end by complimenting everybody. I think it was a very interesting discussion and I learned quite a bit. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Brian, and thank you, panelists. I think that's all the time we have for today. I would like to thank His Excellency at the Ministry of Energy in Brunei for hosting this conference and having this event, and also the other panelists here. I would have summarized theirs each presentation, but I think you all have done such a good job. We remember it. It's abundantly clear to me that this type of panel shows the commitment that's happening. You know, I think of Melanie's comments. You know, we really do have to acknowledge the statistics and move on this. But I think of Peter and Brian, who are closer to the wellhead here, and Ushio. You know, we're working on these solutions, and zero energy buildings are possible. So, you know, on behalf of this panel, I'd like to thank everyone for listening today. In closing, you know, hopefully you can dial into the other presentations that are up over the next 2 days, and hopefully Dr. Nuki and the folks at DMG are going to keep things moving as efficiently as possible. But on behalf of this panel, thank you to everyone, and please have an enjoyable rest of the conference.